Guys, I'm really happy to have you here today. And just to give you a quick introduction of myself and what I'm doing into the industry. So I'm a creator artist. And by creator artist, I'm not someone that is working into the dynamics part of the industry, into the dynamic part of the usual creator artist, but I'm someone that is making modeling, texturing, look dev, and I'm a freelancer. So basically, when I need to work on a project for clients, I'm trying to do everything. I'm trying to do modeling, texturing, look dev, and sometimes, and that's something that I have been learning these days, I will try to push myself to do grooming as well. And yeah, I think that's kind of like my the main introduction of what I'm doing into the VFX industry. So I'm also a teacher. So I'm doing a lot of teaching online, also doing some teaching into workshop into schools, mainly in France at the moment, but possibly I think that's something that I will try to do is to teach also in the UK and to try to teach maybe in like other countries. So I'm teaching workshop in schools, and of course I'm also teaching at the CG Master Academy. So I'm teaching animal and creature anatomy, and part of my course is also about how to texture this kind of creature and how to be able to make everything. So we can definitely land a job into VFX or into games or yeah, into CGI and making creature for CGI content.
That's great. Gael, do you want to give us a quick summary of how you got into the industry? You know, what was your first interview like? Some of the beneficial things about school, and maybe some of your targets getting into school and some of your targets getting into work. I know we're going to go over your process today, so I don't want to take up too much time doing that, but I think it might be helpful. And for anyone listening in, you can also kind of type over here into the Q&A, you know, how much of kind of the personal side of business and working as artists you want to hear from Gael today, and, you know, how much of the process you're looking to check out. But I know you have some interesting stories there, and something we could talk about later is the cycle of an artist, not just getting into the industry, which is covered everywhere right now, but you know, once you've been in the industry for 3 or 4 years, or have several AAA projects under your belt or tentpole films, what some of the differences are where there's not as much education online right now. But if you can give us a quick summary real quick of kind of where you got started and how you got in, and what changed after you got in.
So yeah, I can tell you that. So something that I did was to start learning before learning VFX. Something that I did was definitely to try to find a way for me to put all the images, all the pictures that I had in mind, and to put that on paper. So this is like the main points that guide me to learn VFX, and that guide me into the school Artifix. So before going into Artifix, I know that I wanted to be able to like do some creatures, and I always was inspired by creatures like Godzilla or King Kong and dinosaurs. So I always knew that I wanted to do that. And also before learning VFX, something that I was really passionate about was to be able to draw pictures. So definitely I had a lot of picture in mind, like coming from Magic the Gathering. I have like a few illustrators that I could speak about because I really loved them before going into VFX and still love what they are doing. And also people like artists like David Gemmell and Didier Graffet. So Didier Graffet was the illustrator for the book of David Gemmell, and I always was interested in like how to be able to do this kind of thing. So when we have a picture in mind, definitely something that we want to do is to be able to put that on paper. So that's what guided me to Artifix. So Artifix is a school that is specialized into VFX. I learned VFX and most of the pipeline environments. So pipeline for animation movie, pipeline for AAA or blockbusters. So that's something that I learned at Artifix. So it's a 4-year school, and something that I did during this 4 year was definitely to learn most of the the pipeline. So when you are students, something that you sometimes you may want to do is to like go directly into your specialty, because you already have something in mind. You already know that you want to end up in like maybe the creature department of a studio, or maybe you want to be a character artist. But something that I learned at Artifix was to be able to see the big picture, was to be able to see through all the department. And definitely I think that's something that like a lot of students should keep in mind when they are in school. It's like really important to be able to manipulate everything. So once we are in, and this was something that worked for me. So once we are in, once we are able to find a job, we know that even if we will work in just one specialty, we will be able to be a reliable artist. And that's definitely something that's worked for me back in the day. So back when I was graduated from Artifix. So my first job after Artifix was at MPC. And at MPC, so I had
And
an
I was working
interview
on Jungle Book, correct?
on
Or
Jungle Book, yeah.
yeah, that's a
That
great,
was
great
my
project.
first big project. So I had an interview at the end of Artifix because of the school. So at the end of the school, we are working. So during the last year, during 1 year, we are working on one movie with like a lot of other students. And at the end of this year, we definitely have to find a company. We have to find our first job. And my first job was at MPC doing something that I wanted to do, and it was Creature.
And when you went into for that interview, what were the things that you felt that kind of won you that position over other qualified candidates? I think something we've talked about before was the fact that, you know, no matter what school you go to nowadays, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's CGMA or Art Center, any school, that, you know, if you're in those top 20, 30 schools in the industry, it doesn't necessarily matter, quote unquote, who's the best, but rather how much you're putting into it. Are you doing just what the teacher assigns? Are you doing just the amount of homework that you've been scheduled, or are you going that extra mile? And, you know, for you, you got that first interview. What do you feel were the things that gave you a competitive edge over other people applying for that same spot? And then the second step to that question would be, once you were working, what do you feel was missing from your education that you got at school, and how did you, you know, how did you respond to that?
So I think that's something that helped me to find a job at MPC. So to land my first job at MPC was definitely the work that I did during my last year at Artifix. So I can show you a little bit of the work that I have and that I did back in the day. And so I think that's something that worked really well for me was to, with my former demo reel, with my student demo reel, was to be able to show a little bit of everything that were like expected from someone who want to find a job at MPC. Something that I did also during my last year was to push myself into learning the kind of tools that they were using at MPC and the kind of tools that they are using in like most of the major big production studio like Framestore, like DNEG. And this wasn't really something that I had the chance to study when I was at Artifix, because we have so many things to learn when we are students. We have to learn the general pipeline. So of course, when we need to, people that already know when they are students that they want to learn a job into characters art or into creature art, we'll have to take that like a bit more time on their own to like keep learning some software. So for example, something that I showed on my students demo reel, and I can show you that actually. So something that I showed was to say to the company, to say to MPC that I was able to use Mari, which wasn't something that was teach into my school, and that definitely something that like a lot of big production studio are looking for. So if you say that you want to apply for texturing position, of course you will have to show that. You will have to show that you know how to use the software. You will have to show that Also, something that is really important, so when you are doing texturing, is to do also a bit of look dev. When you are doing sculpting, is to show that you know how to manipulate a displacement map, which is definitely something that is also really important.
Right.
And
And
to
I
merge
want to jump
everything
in and
together.
pause right there just real quick because there's just a really important thing that you're talking about that I think doesn't get hit online very much that you and I talked about was
Hmm.
the cycle of an artist, whether you're a student or a professional, and meaning that there are times where being an anatomy expert or a creature expert is going to be the thing that gets you a job. But there are also times where, as you mentioned, picking up Mari and being one of those initial users or the early adopters, even if your anatomy skills and your creature skills aren't as developed, can give you an
Hmm.
edge. You just have to understand timing and be able to jump in and understand what's your weakness and balance them back out, right? So maybe you spent the past 8 months on anatomy and creature design, but you haven't jumped on Mari or you haven't taken a
Hmm.
look at texturing XYZ. And I think that's one of the things that made me notice you early on was I was like, oh wow, I've seen a lot of people use Mari for doing human characters, but I haven't really seen anybody using it for creatures. And creatures are so much about textures, and
Hmm. Yeah.
it really made you stand out from literally thousands of people that upload to sites, gallery sites. So I just thought that that's an important part to kind of point out, uh, and the fact that you getting into that first job, I think you started to specialize early on, but then kind of switch gears a little bit into being more of a
Hmm.
generalist, correct? A little bit
Yeah.
back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there is a lot. So we already spoke about that with Travis. That's something that is, I think, is really part of the journey of an artist. And this is this circle where the first thing that you want to do, and definitely at the end of the study, is to not to be able to show that you are the most senior, because of course you are just a former student. So something that you need to show is that you are reliable, and to show that, you will have to show that you know a lot of techniques. So of course, something that I can see and that we can see definitely on this show reel is that it's not the most amazing anatomical student demo reel, but something that I'm showing on this demo reel is that I have a lot of technique, and I can be an artist that is able to manipulate topology. I can be an artist that is able to manipulate sculpts and to manipulate look dev texturing, so all this kind of stuff that are really technical. And that's something that we are expecting at the end of the school. Definitely something that we are expecting from students. But when you are an artist and you really see your career as something that you want to discover, and you want to make it to evolve. So something that you have to understand is that at some point you will get back to something that will be more about theory. So theory is really important, because when we need to learn about anatomy, definitely we need to take time for ourselves. We need to push ourselves to learn that. And that's not something that you will be able to learn from course into a school. That may be something that you will be able to learn from a specialized course online, but that's not something that you will have time to discover into your 3 years as a student, your 3 years in a school. So this circle is always evolving. So it's also part of how I see my learning curve. So I'm always trying to go back to anatomy to make sure that I can manipulate and I can master more of animal anatomy, and I can put the picture that I have in mind onto paper. But sometime I will see that there is a deficit out of it. So something that I will need to do is to go back to more technique. So I will need to be able to use Mari, for example, and to develop new technique that maybe not interesting for someone that is just aiming at sculpting creature, but that's definitely something that is pushing me to make my technique to evolve, and to be someone that I think and I hope a lot of company will want to work with. So definitely this circle is really important. It's like pushing you to be a certain artist at a certain time, so you will be able to find a job, because that's what we need. And then once we will feel that, okay, we got enough of this job, we have to keep growing, and we have to keep pushing the learning curve into like some other aspect of our work.
Yeah, I think that's important if you're a student or young artist or even mature artists working at one studio to kind of have that knowledge or be looking towards that. Now, I think it's good if we take a few minutes to answer some questions. And I
Yeah,
personally like one question here
sure.
because this is something that we've gone over before with talking about 2D versus 3D anatomy and learning
Mm-hmm.
2D versus 3D anatomy. I think that your class is probably one of the most beneficial classes out there. As we talked before, you have brick and mortar schools where you might get 4 or 5 total classes in a 2-3 year program, and none of those classes include that 3D anatomy. And that's sometimes there's benefits of brick and mortar, there's benefits of online, but that's one of the big benefits online is you can now get a class like yours. And while this isn't a commercial for your class necessarily, I think it's important to talk about the things that have value. And one of the things that we discuss is 2D anatomy and learning from 2D anatomy. While that is helpful, while that is useful, a lot of the 2D anatomy focuses on the surface muscles, the very thin surface muscles that, yes, they are important to your model, but the difference between a 2D artist and a 3D artist is with 3D, you have the volume that those underlying muscle groups create. And specifically what I like about what you talk about with anatomy is focusing so much on the bone structure. So, in saying that, the question we have from Brian Long, and is it Luong or Long? But I hope I'm not messing up your name. But when sculpting character or creature anatomy, what would be the first most important muscle groups you would establish before going back to the secondary and tertiary details? What's your process when you're working on a character? Like, where do you start? What's the most important?
I think that I can definitely
first?
show you this video. So that's something that we did in production at one of us. So something that we did with like a few other people. So Lasse that was in charge of the rigging and the dynamic on this guy, and Jarl that was in charge of the animation. And we also had a few other people in charge of this project. But it's really showing to my students and showing to everyone what is my workflow when I need to make a creature, and definitely showing also that how important is like to learn anatomy from the inside and to learn like the deep anatomy, because that's how I'm working usually. That's like I'm always starting by putting together the the skeletal system, making sure that the skeleton is really accurate. So on the skeleton, something that we have, so that's maybe not something that we can really see on this guy because this was like with a lot of adjustments due to the fact that we needed to make it to work in Ziva. But something that we will want to put a lot of emphasis on is to be able to find all the different landmarks. So for example, something that we'll find is this the spine of the scapula, then we'll find the acromial process, then the great tuberosity of the humerus, and all other pieces of the bones. And that's something that is really important to understand, and something that we are not really learning, I think, when we are doing only 3D. But definitely when we are putting a character into a 3D environment, when we are putting a character into ZBrush, that's exactly what we need to focus on, because all these tiny details that are coming from the bones are amazingly important when we need to make a creature, when we need to make it to move. And that's what we are expecting from a creature that we are sculpting in ZBrush. We are expecting it to move, and we are expecting it to be accurately speaking about anatomy, speaking about the bones, speaking about the muscle on top. I'm always starting with the skeletal system. And that's really a rule for me, making sure that the bones are accurate from the beginning. Because once I will get the bones to be accurate, I will be able to find all the tiny details that will help me to put the muscle anatomy on that. So this little drawing is something that I'm sharing also with my students. That's photos that I took of a poster that I have in my home. And definitely also showing that when we are looking at some landmarks, some topography of the bones, it's for a reason. So all the tiny details that we'll find are here for a reason. So we'll find like this bicipital groove here. We'll find this kind of notch on the bone. And if it's here, it's for a reason, and it's to have like some pieces, some part of the biceps to go through it. So some of the tendon of the biceps to go through it. We have this deltoid tuberosity that is also an important landmark. And if I know that, if I know everything from the bones, always different topographic information, I will be able then to play the most superficial anatomy. So I will be able to play the muscle on top of everything.
And we talked about getting, after you spent the time looking at the anatomy, sculpting out the anatomy, understanding bone structure and muscle structure and ligaments. We talked about making sure you get out to places like zoos or being able to take a look at the animation of the
Mm-hmm.
animal. Nico had a question about kind of in intersection points with, the bone, so to speak. And I think you kind of addressed that a little bit with what you just kind of reviewed. But taking a look at how much the shoulder moves on a horse, and
Mm-hmm.
when you look at your student work from previous classes, that's definitely one of the things that caught my attention. Was that in today's market, you don't model characters in A or T pose anymore. You've got to be able to animate
Yeah.
them. And the big problem from older modelers like myself from 10 years, 15 years ago is, you could put the bicep in the same position every time and it didn't matter. It didn't affect you if it was always in the same position, even if it was posed wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
there's a lot of life to the sculpts coming out of your class. And I think that, thinking about the animation and the fact that, you're mentioning not just learning the anatomy, but understanding anatomy and defining that the skeleton gives you so much information, not just where the muscles attach, but also to how that limb is going to rotate, move, how much flexibility is
Mm-hmm.
there,
Yeah.
how far can the spine be able to bend or flex. And I think those things are crucial. Those are a big deal. Gael, if you take a look at these questions and you see one you want to jump ahead of me with, or as mentioned, you guys can upvote questions because we're getting a lot of them come through at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, we want to make sure that we try to get to everybody. A lot of them are going to be overlapping questions, so we may not answer everybody's, advice on getting into the industry. Um, some of those things I think we're probably going to cover in general conversation. One of the questions that I liked, Gael, was just on the software. If you wouldn't mind, just kind of quickly
Mm-hmm.
opening each of the software that you're currently using in your pipeline and just giving us a quick heads up of why you chose that particular software and give us a little bit of an idea of your process, if you can cover
Yeah,
that.
sure. So I think that we can start with definitely starting with ZBrush. So of course, ZBrush is like the key to start sculpting a character, start sculpting creature. And definitely, I think that's kind of the best tool for me to like put together all my creature and also making sure that it will help me later on to work on the texturing. So it's something that I found with ZBrush is that you can like develop a lot of utilities, a lot of additional file with it, and you really have to understand how to use that in conjunction with Maya. So doing my retopology in Maya, making sure that my model are working for production. So we keep speaking about that. We keep repeating that we have to use we have to be reliable into production. So we have to make a creature that will be able to be animated. So we have to be able to manipulate all the topology by hand to place all the faces and making sure that once we'll get into production, the position of the faces, the position of the topology will serve for the animation, for the rigging, and for all the other departments. So something that I'm saying also to my student during the course is that the topology is not only here to help the other department, it's also a tool for you as a modeler to help you to create some posing. So that's also why I'm forcing my student every time to do even an automatic retopology. So even of this guy, which is some kind of sculpture, you can see that here we have like a topology, and it's definitely to ease the work of a sculptor. So that's the kind of thing that we need to focus on, even if we are not aiming at becoming artists for production. It's the kind of thing, the kind of application of topologies that will definitely help you as a modeler to keep pushing your model. So topology, I'm doing it fully manually in Maya. Things that maybe I can just like try to open retopology scene with a lion that I did. So Maya for the topology, I'm going back into ZBrush to make sure that I can find back my details, and then sculpting additional, so secondary parts, secondary details, and tertiary details once I get the topology. And then I'm using Mari for the texturing. So Mari is also something like a software that I love because I developed a lot of workflow for Mari and a lot of personal workflow. So workflow to easier work for me to create and to put together my creatures. And definitely also a tool that can help you to land a job into the industry, because most of the major studio, if you just like, if you say that you want to be a texture artist, but you are not able to use Mari and you want to work into VFX, you will not be able to do that. So that's something that I learned, and back at Artifix, and I always try to apply it.
So I got two questions here that I think that are mutually beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
As a student, I find it hard to choose creatures to make a sculpt out of, really to serve my portfolio. And do you have any advice for choosing creatures? What are some of the things you look out for? What are some of the pitfalls to avoid when doing a portfolio piece? The second question, and I'm kind of just grouping these together, but the other question, how do you go about creating imaginary creatures? And these two questions I think are really relevant, because when you take a look at your class and a lot of the student work coming out of your class, we see leaping lions and cheetahs and, you know, a horse here and there. And so it's like, wait a minute, what do we talk about creatures? You know, is that to build the library for artists? Why focus on the animal anatomy so much? And how do you then use that to create a creature? And what is most beneficial to show in your portfolio so the studio understands you have the maturity for the job?
So I think that some of the creature or some of the animals that I will recommend to students are definitely the one where we'll be able to find most of the references. So even working like on another breed, so here we are speaking of a fox, but something that we can find easily is like definitely references from dogs, because they are like their pets. So of course we have loads of them. We always we always bring them to veterinary, so we'll be able to find a lot of anatomical resource for that. And I think that's something that I can like push a lot of students or push a lot of artists that want to go into the world of creature. I can definitely push them to study a lot of dogs, a lot of horses as well. So we want to take creature where we'll not have a lot of fur. So of course, like I see that a lot of students are always stunting by sculpting a wolf, which is great, but it's like a difficult anatomy. It's a difficult anatomy not only because of the because it's hard to find a dissection of a wolf. I'm not even sure that we'll be able to find that, but it can be a difficult anatomy because we have like so much fur on this guy. Some people will want to work on bear because like it's really an interesting, we can get like an amazing sculpt out of it, but it's also a hard creature to work on because we'll not have a lot of references. I think that's also a bear without fur, hairless.
That's a tough one, isn't there? There's very little information out there on fur track.
That's really a tough creature. That's something that we had to do. So when we were working on Jungle Book, this was one of the reference we were using, and definitely it's looking anything else than a bear. So something that I will push my student to do is always to try to do a creature where it's easy to work on. It's easy to find references. It's easy to find dissection as well. So I think that's creature like, or a breed of dogs, so Peruvian dog. Don't know if you heard about them, but definitely it's a great great breed to study, because here we can see most of the anatomy through the skin. We don't have to dig through the fur. We don't have to imagine what is happening underneath, because we can see everything. So definitely it can be one of the creatures that you may want to do. And also doing posing on creature and learning how to sell the piece. And I think that's maybe the next topic that I can really speak about. So learning how to sell the piece. So when I see a lot of sculpture on a lot of portfolio, and sometimes it's only sculpture, it's only ZBrush model. It's like not something that I'm expecting to see from a portfolio. So you have to learn how to use all the artistic fundamental when you want to find a job. I'm speaking about learning how to do photography, learning how to do composition, and learning, if we cannot do that, but just learning the principles so we can apply that in a 3D environment. And that's also a key for like a lot of new joiner, a lot of new artists to find a job. So when I'm seeing like, and I can show you some beautiful pictures that were made by some of my students, because definitely learning how to sell the piece is like really important. So we have this amazing study from Svet. This one from, so this one was from Svet, this one was from Jess, and this one was from Sonia. So learning how to do render, because that's something that will emphasize the fact that you know how to sculpt. When you are sculpting, it's for a reason. It's for selling the piece. It's for the fact that you will want to put your creature in motion, or if you do not put it in motion, you will want maybe to print it. You will want to create a beautiful picture out of it. So learning how to light will show that you know where to put the emphasis on your model. You know where to play with the muscle. You know where to play with the contraction of a muscle, or to add fat, or to play with the texture of the skin. So I think that's, they are like, it's the important second step. Apart from doing anatomy, it's also learning how to do rendering, which is learning how to master a bit of lighting and a bit of material as well.
And that's something we talked about with the studios, that even though it's not a job prerequisite nowadays for every position to utilize new software and to kind of show, we were talking about DreamWorks and the fact that so many of the artists at DreamWorks were using Marmoset Viewer, even though they didn't need to be able to kind of go in and give a supervisor pre-visualization what that character is going to look like. That skill, even though not required, or may not be the general advice in getting the job, is a big thing. There's quite a few questions here.
Yeah.
In different formats that are pretty much saying the same thing, you know, as far as how do you create an inventive creature if you're doing the same thing for plants, or how do you know, what's a definite no-no. You kind of covered a great one, I think, which is really difficult to do animals with fur, right? Because fur is going to hide a lot of that underlying structure of anatomy and so on. Are there other no-nos that you no-nos? Are there other don'ts that you advise staying away from? Like, is it a challenge for younger artists or new artists to be able to mix endo and exoskeleton characters? Can you do an aquatic crab type creature mixed with a furry type creature? Is that something to avoid? Is that something, that could show off your strength? Like, do you have any advice for creating
I think that's
inventive creature from
definitely,
plants?
yeah, definitely that's something that I will stay away from, at least at the beginning, because what you want to show, and that what a lot of studio will look for, they will look for someone that is like able to speak the language of anatomy. They will look for someone that will be able to depict an anatomy that is already existing. So a lot of creatures that we can create, like alien or creature from plants, are really interesting, but we can do that as we can do that later on in our career. But something that is like really more important in order to put this kind of creatures together is to be able to show that we know from human anatomy first, and that we know from animal anatomy first. So something that I can speak about. So I don't think that I get a lot of dragon from my students, but I have one of the dragons that I did. So this guy, and if you're looking, so I cannot share the, I wish I could, but I cannot share all the whips and all the breakdown of this guy, but I really wish I can. I'm like keep asking to the company if I can show that, but it's really hard to get an answer. But when you look at this guy from the early whips are really animal-like. They are really showing some kind of anatomy that we are able to find in most of the mammals. And that's where it show that it's really important, I think, to manipulate and to have a hand on things that are realistic and things that are existing. So for me, making dragons, making creature from plant, making alien is like the next step. It's something that you can do, but do not do that, I think, from the beginning. Just start with human anatomy, making sure that you learn, again, we spoke about bone, so make sure that you learn everything from bone, because definitely this will help you to get to animal anatomy. And once you will get to animal anatomy, you will want to compare everything. So you will want to speak about comparative anatomy. So speaking about like the anatomy of a horse in comparison to the anatomy of a dog, the anatomy of a cat, and the anatomy of a human. We want to take like different skulls and we just put them together, and we'll see that we'll find the exact same topography. So
So
exact same
essentially, you're
landmarks.
applying the learning skills that you developed just doing anatomy on a human and
Mm-hmm.
targeted at the most difficult level, and applying that to the anatomy that everything exists in everything. A tree has a certain amount of anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
As we mentioned, even with fur on a wolf, there's fur tracks, which are the anatomy of how fur flows. So
Yeah.
basically, if you push the student hard enough to learn the anatomy of the human, or learn the anatomy of a complex creature that exists with that ability to self-check based off of real-world evidence, it helps you much
Mm-hmm.
better in the next step.
Yeah,
One question
exactly.
while you have your dragon up, or not
Yeah.
one question, but there's about 4 or 5 questions really. Looks like we have a lot of riggers here today, or a lot of people looking to work with riggers, which is good. It's good to
Yeah, it's
talk
really
about
cool.
rigging when we talk about sculpting. And some of the
Mm-hmm.
questions are relating to kind of just the foundation setup of rigging. Do you start with like a pre-made library of skeletal muscle structures, or are you responsible for creating those? And then for you, beyond your design phase and sculpting phase, how much work are you then going to be doing to develop muscle systems and muscle structures? What's the communication between you and the rigging like what's the volume of professional work that may or may not be the sexy stuff that goes online, but that you're responsible for and that these guys need to be ready for?
So when I'm building a creature, so every time I will try to make the skull, so and to make like if it's not the accurate and every vertebra, or if it's not every rib, I will try to block all the bones myself. So I'm not using any pre-made, or not using any brushes for that, or not using any subtools that we can find online. I'm just trying to like sculpt them myself so I can understand and I can feel the anatomy of the creature that I'm making. I really want to be accurate in all the process of creation. So that's why every time I will take the time to sculpt it. So sometimes depends of the production. So sometimes it can take a little bit more time, and that's the case for the two latest project on which I worked on. So on this fog that I did with Lasse. So Lasse was in charge of the rigging on this guy. Something that I did first was to sculpt the skeleton for this guy, making sure that we had it for some rigging purposes. And definitely for rigging, we need to make sure that the bones are separated, because they will need to use that and they will need to be without deformation, which is really important. That's something that I did for Lasse. And something that I did as well was to make sure also that the topology was usable for production, and that we had at least some UVs on the model, because of course Ziva, which is the dynamic system that we use on this guy, have a need for UVs on bones and on the muscle. So something that I had to do next was also to model all the bones. Sorry, not the bones, but the muscle, and I made them one by one, because for technical reason, because Lasse needed this muscle to be detached, and he needed them also to have like a correct topology and to have some UVs on them. So we need, for technical reason, we need to model them separately. I could build my own library, but that's not something that I did for the moment. So every time I'm like sculpting everything from scratch, and it's also pushing me to like be able to find more accuracy. And every time I will work on a new creature, I will be able to go through more details, and I will try to make sure that the volume and the thickness, for example, on the muscle is like more accurate. So something that I did wasn't really present on this fox, but definitely will be more present on the creatures that I did on the latest production on which I worked on. So making sure that everything was anatomically correct and was looking as in real life. So we've detached bones and we've detached muscle components. So for the adjustment of the muscle on this guy, so I wasn't able to do that because working in a production environment, you do not have time to do everything that you want. So sometime you will have just to pass that to the next department. So let's say the refinement on the anatomy to make sure that the skins that I did thanks to this guy. So when you need to do the skin, basically you just take all the muscle, you merge everything. You can do that really quickly in ZBrush. You create a huge dynamesh with all the muscle, and then you scale to add more volume, to add the volume of the fats. You want to add the volume sometimes of the tendons that are just like a little bit missing, or sometimes you want to have some skin fall on that. So at one point, the work that you have to do as a modeler will be a little bit detached than the work that you have to do at the rigger or as a technical character artist. So I had to focus on the skin and focus on making the texturing for the skin and making the skull for the skin, but the final adjustment were made by the rigger.
A couple of questions to jump in with are
Yeah.
the relationship or the amount of time that you're spending in ZBrush versus Maya, and are you always following the same pipeline? Are there times where you just go in and sculpt the creature completely out and then go back and refine bones, muscle groups, things along that line? And where do you find posing to be the most beneficial? Are you thinking about the pose in ZBrush, or are you jumping into Maya and using an existing rig, or are you doing most of your rigging there?
So for me, the most of the workflow for doing creature and for modeling creature is in ZBrush. And the only parts on which I'm jumping back into Maya will be for retopology. And this day I've been using less and less Maya because I've been building some kind of universal quadruped topology, which is something that I can use. So I can basically take my retopology, my universal retopology, and I just project that onto my concept sculpts that were done in ZBrush. And
do you have any examples of retopo? It looks like there's quite a few people asking about topology here, so we might have some younger artists that just haven't done it.
Yeah, sure. I think that I can. Let me just find the layers I did, because it's like I'm using the topologies that I built for production, and I'm using this same topology and always trying to transpose that to all my creature. And because topology is like something that we can think like bones landmark. So we'll always find the same bones landmark, which means that the topology will follow this rule. It's also something that will be anatomically transposable between one species to another. So let me just find this lion here.
And stacking questions on top of you, because there's a lot coming through. You guys are asking good questions. When you're getting started,
thanks,
do you start with a Z-sphere, or do you just go into Dynamesh? How do you kind of start just blocking out, whether it be bone structure, the character itself? Where do you start in ZBrush?
So I'm doing something a little bit different than other. I'm not starting with a sphere, but I'm starting with a cube. And okay. It's like, yeah, it's not a huge difference at all. It's just like similar, but when I'm starting, it's just from a Dynamesh with a really low amount of polygons. So I also see a lot of artists, and sometimes I get some students that are sending some file to me, and I have like 100 or millions and millions of polygons for something that is really smooth. So basically, something that you want to do in 3D is to use the tool and to use the topology. So when you are starting to build like a skull or something like that, something that we'll see on a skull are facets, are planes, and these planes can be obtained really easily with just a few polygons. So that's how I'm trying to work in ZBrush, starting with a Dynamesh that will be really low. And then once I will be satisfied with the first aspect, with the first plane aspect, something that I will do is to add more resolution, is to build on top of that and add more polygons, so I can start to draw and start to add some strokes for the topography. So for the landmarks, for the crest of the nose, for example, for the margin of the eyes, the border of the eyes, the zygomatic bone. So building all the anatomical aspect and the kind of finishing aspect on my sculpt.
So Kaglar and Taylor have two questions, and they're somewhat related. Taylor's question is, what are some of the most requested type of work you have? And I'm going to tag that onto Kaglar, if I'm saying your name correctly. What would be the recommendations and advice for a hard surface artist who wants to start to improve his skills in character art? When I first read that question, I was like, I just read what would be your advice for the hard surface artist? I was like, is Kaglar in the right webinar? But now I think it's probably one of the most relevant questions of the whole thing, because in today's market, there are so many, biomech creatures and characters that, really do, come into play. And typically, traditionally as a modeler or a sculptor, if you're really strong at hard surface, your weakness is typically organic. If you're really good at organic, your weakness is typically hard surface. So right now there is a really great market for people that can do both really well. Some of those organics aren't even creatures. They're the Iron Man suit, right? What are some of the type of work that you get that's a little bit off the cuff for creature work that people don't always associate with creatures? And, for a hard surface modeler, where does he start? What can he do right out the gates to get better at doing the organic creature type stuff?
I think that I will keep saying every time the same answer, but starting with bones is like a way for, and it's definitely showing like it for me. It's like the path between hard surface and organic modeling, starting with bones, because bones are really working like a hard surface model. And when we are thinking of the muscle anatomy on top of that, is just the muscle anatomy is something that I'm not speaking a lot during the webinar or during my talks, because a muscle is basically just one string that is here to pull two bones, and that's it. That's how simple it is. So yeah, definitely starting by understanding the skeletal anatomy. And also something that is really important, and that's where hard surface modelers are doing amazingly well, is that they understand how to create some faces, how to create some planes. That's something that I'm not really good at. So for example, I'm a terrible hard surface modeler. I will not even be able to do that into production because I spend too much time and I'm interesting too much into creature. But being able to simplify the faces, being able to simplify the planes of the face or the planes of the body is something that I think hard surface modeler should be really capable of doing. So understanding the mechanic with the skeletal system and understanding how to simplify the muscle anatomy on top of that.
Another great question from Nabil, I think, at least from my point of view, is when you design a new creature, how do you decide which group muscles you keep out and which you change? To me, that's such a relevant question with concept artists. 9 times out of 10, when someone's struggling with a piece or trying to finish a piece, it's because there's something they need to take out, not put in. And I think by default, it's so easy nowadays just to keep adding detail. When and where do you make choices? What are the important parts of the anatomy you can't lose, and what are the parts you can get away with if you're on budget, especially for time to get done quickly or to simplify?
So yeah, just making sure that first the skeletal system is correct, but not going into all the details for that part, because of course something that we want to do when we have to do something on budget is just to make sure that first the volume and the proportion are correct. So that's also something that I'm teaching to my students. So during the week 2 and the week 3, they have to sculpt the skeletal system of the creature, but they do not have to take time to put all the bony landmarks, because At some point, they will also need to put the skin on top of that. So they will need first to put the model to transform it into an écorché, so to put the muscle, and they will need to add the fat and the skin on top of that. So just trying to find ways to work really quickly, blocking the proportion with some Z-sphere, for example, for the skeletal system, just adding the major landmarks, the major pieces that we want to find, like the spine of the scapula, the great trunk carter, if we are speaking of the back limbs, and then quickly adding the muscle group on top of that. So the muscle groups, sometimes we can lose ourselves thinking about all the deep muscle, but that's definitely not something that we will see or that we'll have to use into production. So the deep muscle, we do not want to understand all of them. Basically, we just want to understand the major one that will be able to make the body to move. Something that we'll have to do next is just to like merging everything and starting adding the skin, adding the fat. So sometime we can focus on, or we can try to like sculpt a lot of details, sculpt a lot of skin folds, but it always depends on the scale of the production. So if we don't have time, if we don't have enough budget, of course, we'll have to just focus on the major folds. We'll have to focus on the secondary shape, because there are so many ways to get away with the tertiary shapes. So many new techniques, like the one that's, or the workflows that are available on Texturing XYZ. So now doing skin pores, doing like this kind of fine details is something really simple. So that's why I think that we can save the time to do that. And we just want to focus on making the skull to be as good as it can be in the amount of time that we have.
Right. I know we're a little tight on time, but I've got two questions that are real good from Tamara.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to, yes, on the question, I'm just trying to find the topology for the lion. Don't know where I put that, but if I found it, I will show you for sure.
So Tamara and Rob's questions, I'm going to kind of merge these together. I really like Tamara's because it's one of the things now compared to 10 years ago is getting into the industry. If you're taking a serious look at what the role of a professional and you have to live up to as a professional, like all of the software you really need to have a firm understanding of, it can be overwhelming. Right? Like, Mari and Texturing XYZ, and, now you've got to rig and be able to light a little bit. But, it's basically asking, do you see that some roles in 3D industry are more in demand now than others? I mean, I know that's always going to be a cycle. There's always going to be a period of time where modelers make the most money. There's going to be a period of time where riggers make the most money. Well, riggers are always going to make the most money. But there's times where there's an influx. And a lot of that comes from, obviously, modelers getting pulled from games to work on film, vice versa, the type of projects that come out. But what she's saying is, do you need to know how to do everything? Examples: generalist, texture, environment, clothing, organics, prop, technical, shaders, hard surface weapons, vehicles. She's basically asking that question. And then Rob's question is, do you have any advice on what kind of concept the average character artist would like to see from a 2D artist? What is the most helpful for a 3D artist to model from a concept for? Now, those are two different questions, but I know that I'm pretty sure you know where I'm going with this, which is, today's market, the 3D artist is expected to, in a lot of ways, be the concept artist. The days of a 3D artist like yourself working only from a 2D are not gone, but they're definitely not the general rule. So from those 2 point of views, what software, what topics, and what is the modern role right now today for you as a creature designer, as a creature modeler in film, doing what you do?
So I think that the first question was about the role. What are the most common roles that are to the industry, right? Yeah. So again, because it's always a cycle and it's a really quick cycle, I think. So I can see an evolution. So I've not been for so long into the industry, but I can already see an evolution, and I can see that on every year. So because it's a cycle, I think that the most important for people, for artists, is to focus on what they love and what they definitely want to do. So I think that into the years I have been into the industry, I have seen a lot of people have been asked for grooming because it's definitely we have a lot of furry creature, and doing a creature with fur is taking a lot of time. So I think that it's also a position where we have a lot of demand. But again, if you don't feel like you're gonna groom creatures for ages and you don't feel like you're gonna do that for as a career, you don't have to do that. You just have to basically show the best of what you can do, and that's what I'm trying to do. So something that I did. So I remember when I was at Artifix, I had one of my teachers that told me, you know, you will never be um, as you will never be one of the best creature artists because you have to you there are so many people that are better than you into modeling creature. And I always knew that I wanted to do that, and I just forced myself basically to put the time and to learn new techniques and to become better at doing it. So until the point where I can do a creature in just like a week, and I can do a topology in 2 or 3 days or something like that, and a topology that will be able to work in animation. And that's something that I'm pushing myself to do because I love it. So basically, what I'm saying is just like find the job, find the career of your dream, and then you will do it good, and you will do it so well that company will want you to do it for them. And I think that's what is working pretty well for new artists, for new joiner. So
Okay.
just take into consideration that it will take time. It can ask maybe several years before you feel capable of doing it, but it's definitely worth it because at the end you will just do something that you love, which will be like a fulfill of your dream.
Have you used Yeti or XGen for your grooming and production?
I've,
Are you responsible for fur?
yeah, I've used. I've not been responsible for fur in production. I've used Yeti. I've used just a little bit of Xgen. So Yeti, because Yeti is like a software that I like not for the grooming tools because they are really hard to manipulate. And I think that if my friends that are like professional and freelance groomer are seeing these talks, they will keep coming back to me and saying that Yeti is like one of the most amazing tool. And I agree with them on the texturing aspect because I'm a texture artist, so I know how to manipulate texture. But I think that learning how to manipulate the groom in the viewport is really hard, and that's where XGen is definitely helping you on that aspect.
Well, we've got two questions left that I'd like to kind of group together, and I guess that's about all the time we have for. Thanks for dedicating the time to us. I do
Mhm.
want to say that there were a lot of questions that didn't get answered, and to both Gael, myself, and Manny, I think anybody in education, it's the thing that's the most valuable about taking a class is jumping in and asking questions. You're never going to get in trouble for asking questions. There's never
Mm,
a stupid question, right? Like
yeah.
even if people give me crap about what brush do you use, ask it. That's the benefit of having a live class or a class where you have the Q&A. So thank you for asking the questions. Sebastian and Anita have two questions, which look like they're coming from the fact that do you recommend a course for a fan of anatomy but who's never sculpted anything? And would you recommend technical artists learn sculpting as well? I think that these two are good questions because you and I have watched so many traditional clay sculptors, whether it be Rick
Mhm.
Baker or Brian, Steve Wang, these guys that are not necessarily fans of anatomy, they're actually doing sculpting and anatomy in a different matter. But once they go digital, it may take them 2 or 3 months to learn the software, but once they learn that software, man, they just take off. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
for somebody who's a fan of anatomy, how do you recommend they take the next steps? Even if they've never sculpted anything, and for a technical artist learning sculpting, uh, what are some of the tools and workflows for the artists you support? That's a little bit of a long question for the end of it, but for those two, where do they get started? What's the best next step for them?
So I think that I had a student that were like a clay sculptor. I don't know if he put some of his work um, on CGS, but I was really happy with the work that he produced, and I think that it's probably one of the guy who did the most amazing dragon of the class, and he was a clay sculptor before that, so he just started to learn ZBrush, and he basically just jumped into my course. So Arnold did an amazing job on that. We just try to find for you the dragon that he did, and definitely think that the tool is just a way to be able to put in on paper what you have in mind, and what you want to do and what you want to learn at the beginning is just how simple it is, or just to learn how to use it the most simplest way you can. Because if you're just thinking about all the complexity, and that's something that a lot of students that are working within ZBrush are doing there, when they are starting to use ZBrush, they are just starting to put a lot of polygons, and they are just starting to like add a lot of details, which is basically not what we want to start with. We just want to start to understand how everything is working, how we can use the simple tool, how we can use just simple brushes and stutter brushes, like for example the move topology, or like the move brush, or like the clay brush. And once we get into that, we can just like find a way to manipulate our model, and we can start understanding how to get from the clay sculpting into the 3D model. So we just try to find for Arnold Kovac, I think, work. Whoops. Maybe if I just put in 3D. Nope. Let me just find his picture, because I'm really happy with his
No
sculpture.
problem. While you're
Yeah,
looking for that, what would you attribute? You've kind of popped up online within the past year or two, and become a major player within the industry. And I think that that's today it's a component of working in industry that you don't necessarily have to do. But I think if you want to compete for the top end jobs, you need to have an online presence. You have
yeah.
the rookies event that you're now doing, the get-togethers. What role does networking kind of play with the information that you have? Like, it's great to be the most anatomically experienced artist in the industry, but if people don't know that about you, or know who you are, how to get a hold of you, it doesn't really help that much, does it?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's also one of the topic I'm like speaking a lot about during the course, is how to be someone that is basically creating product, or that is like selling the piece. So I'm teaching to my students how they can share their work, and how they can find a job with that. And that's where selling the piece is really important. Doing lighting, or lighting one of our sculpts, doing a beautiful picture with one of our skull is like becoming something indispensable, I think, for landing a job. So being someone that is reliable is, you cannot really do that if you're just staying on your side, if you're just staying and working on your side. You have to convey people that you can be an artist for their production. You can be an artist that they will hire, because they can be sure that they will trust you. To do that, something that I like to do. So I didn't started with just saying, hey, I'm a freelancer, I'm doing anatomy, and I know I can do your creature, so just send them over. Something that I started to do at the beginning was to build my portfolio. And in my portfolio, I did a lot of breakdown. And these breakdown are amazingly important, because they are showing that you know how to do the job, and they are showing that you're an artist that is a complete artist. You know that you will work for rigging departments, so you are showing a bit of topology. You know that you want to work into, or you want your sculpting to work for texturing, so you are showing that on your portfolio as well. And you are showing also that your texturing skills are just one step away from the understanding of everything that is needed for look dev. So of course you have to show a little bit of look dev. So once you are done with all these little steps, and you have like a piece on your portfolio that you're really happy with, something that you have to do is definitely to share it. Because if you do not share it, if you do not try to speak with people that are already in the industry. No one will know about you. So you definitely have to go on LinkedIn. You have to advertise yourself. It's amazingly important. That's something that I keep saying to my students and to the ones that are done with the course. We are still speaking together. We are speaking on the Discord that I put together for my students. And we are speaking about techniques. We are speaking about also how to sell the piece and how to make sure that they can find a job if they
Yeah, I
need.
think you do a great job with the artists that have taken classes from you, or artists have coming. I always recognize the artists that are coming from your tutorage when they post
Mhm.
on CGS. And it's interesting because you and I have talked before about the fact that it helps you a lot as a student or as a junior artist, understanding that from the beginning you're creating the asset, not just art. And
Yeah.
there is a downside to thinking that way in the sense that when you post your quote unquote asset or your art on a gallery, you may not get as many views. You may not
Mhm.
get as much of hype as if you just made this like super, blown out thing that you're trying to sell to other artists. But to somebody who's looked at thousands of portfolios or gotten hundreds of artist jobs, I look at that and I'm like, here's an artist that understands they're creating an asset and they understand how to display that asset to a person that recruits professionals. And I think
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
that is a hard sell. I want to just give you a pat in the back. I think that's a hard sell to reach, especially students that have only gotten an education from their friends or the people they admire. I think it's a hard sell to tell people that, look, it may be cool to do this, lion creature with 12 legs and jumping off of a thing in his full-blown scene, but it'll actually help you a lot more if you're looking for work to display it the
Mhm.
same way we'd look at it as an asset when you're applying for a company.
Yeah,
And that
exactly.
might mean the difference between 130 views and 1,000, because the truth is nowadays that there are more fans of art than there are individuals who are going to become a professional artist. And that's where many of your followers are coming from these days. So you do a great job with that. I think I just want to give you a pat on the back for that. Any last thing you want to leave these guys with, as far as anybody interested in taking your class? Where can they find information? Anybody that wants to attend one of your meetups and just shake your hand and contribute there?
Yeah, for people that are living in London, so I'm organizing an event, and people that are living in London and in Paris, and this event will become like international as well. So I'm organizing an event about creatures. So every time for me is about creatures. That's like my favorite topic, and I'm speaking almost only about that, even with my wife. So doing creature and being able to speak with people that are actually making creature for VFX. So the event that I'm organizing is called the Creature Drink, and the next step will be the Creature Legends. So the Creature Legends will have master classes with professionals that will be here to display and to explain for free how they are their own techniques, their own pipeline, and how they are creating all this amazing content for their portfolio or for production. So I think that's one way to be able to find me. So definitely follow me on my portfolios. Follow me on LinkedIn, because on LinkedIn I tend to accept all the students and all the professional, because I think that it's really important to be able to speak with everyone and to know what everyone is doing. And that's where also I will be showing where the next creature event will happen.
Well, I want to give you a huge thanks for the effort and love you put into teaching and work with these guys. I know today was a little bit like an MMA fight. I know I talk really fast. I know I stack a lot of questions, but I felt like you kept up and we made it through a boxing match, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to cram all this type of information and advice into something that, this is the reason why we have 10-week classes, right? So if you are interested, definitely check it out. If you can, post a like on Facebook or share some of Gael's work. That's always a big help to us. And we do notice people that give us a hand, and we can always use help. I do also just want to personally extend a big thanks to Manny and the crew at CGMA. I've been in this business for 20 years. I've had my own studios. I hire artists all the time, work with art departments, and no one cares about students and instructors and the value of a class more than these guys. So I think it's a real
Cool.
honor to be able to jump in here.
Thanks,
So,
Travis.
Manny, did you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, I know I've been a bit silent, but, I wanted the session to be really about, Gael and you guys. So, but, no, I just want to, thank Gael for, just taking time off, out of his schedule. It's like, to share some of his tips and tricks and, kind of educate us all on, just his process, not just being an amazing artist, but as well as an amazing educator. And Travis, thanks for, kind of hosting. It's like, and a lot of, and kind of imparting some of your insight, as well from your perspective. I'm going to post a link to his class so everyone has it. Once again, guys, we're going to be doing, we're going to try to do these more, more regular, and be more consistent about it, which is why, we have Travis kind of helping out with it. But once again, thank you, Gael. Thank you, Travis. And, more importantly, thank you, everyone, for, attending and spending some time with us.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here and for popping by to my webinar, and also huge thanks to CGMA and to Manny, to Travis for all the trust that you put in me, and of course just want to thank my family for all the support that they are giving to me in everything I'm trying to do for the industry. So thanks a lot, guys, and thanks a lot, Travis and Manny.